I was putting away groceries when my daughter's school principal called my phone. I want you to hear this directly from me before the news spreads. Another parent has filed a formal complaint accusing you of abuse. Police have already been notified. The line went dead before I said a word. The bag of pasta I was holding hit the kitchen floor at 4:23 on a Thursday afternoon, and I stood there in my kitchen, looking at it like it was a clue to something I couldn't yet decode. The fusilli scattered across the tiles in a way that felt absurd, cartoonishly ordinary against the magnitude of what had just happened, and I remember thinking, I have to pick that up. That was my first thought. Not, this is a mistake. Someone is lying. My life is being dismantled. Just, I have to pick up the pasta. Or my brain did what brains do when the information they've received is too large for immediate processing. It handed me something small and manageable and stepped back. I picked up the pasta. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor beside the empty bag and stared at the refrigerator for what was probably 2 minutes, but felt like the better part of a decade. The refrigerator hummed. The afternoon light came through the window above the sink at its usual angle. Everything in my kitchen looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago. The world had not shifted, only everything in it. I had been raising my daughter Zara alone for 4 years, since her mother and I divorced when Zara was 4, and I had been doing it with the specific, quiet intentionality of someone who understood that he was the only full-time adult in his child's life, and that this required him to be better than he might otherwise have bothered to be. I was 39 years old, a structural engineer with a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, with a flexible enough schedule to do school drop-offs 4 days a week and soccer pickups 3 afternoons. Zara was 8 years old and obsessive about sea turtles, and had recently decided she would become a marine biologist, a decision she announced at dinner one evening with the absolute finality of someone who has given the matter serious thought and is not open to alternative suggestions. She was funny and opinionated and had her mother's eyebrows and my stubbornness. And she was the best thing in my life by such a significant margin that the second best thing didn't merit a category. I coached her soccer team on Saturdays. I read to her every night we were together. Her pediatrician, Dr. Constance Yaw, had been seeing her since birth and had never once documented a concern about her home environment. I was not a perfect parent. I lost my patience occasionally. I burned dinners. I had once forgotten to sign a permission slip and had to call the school in a panic at 7:45 in the morning. But I was a present, attentive, loving father who showed up, and I had 8 years of documented, witnessed, ordinary daily life to prove it. Principal Adiz Novak had been at Fairfield Elementary for 6 years. She was a competent, or no-nonsense administrator whom I'd interacted with exactly 4 times, once at a welcome assembly, once at a parent-teacher conference, once when Zara had fallen off the climbing structure and needed 2 stitches, and once when Zara's class won a reading competition and I'd come in to watch the award presentation. Our relationship was cordial and entirely unremarkable. I had no idea why she had called me and then hung up without giving me a chance to respond, and I had no idea who the other parent was, and I had no idea what specific allegation had been made. I had precisely 0 pieces of information and an absence of pasta on the kitchen floor, and I had 40 minutes before I was supposed to pick Zara up from her after-school program. I stood up, put the fusilli in the cabinet, and called Principal Novak back. The call went to voicemail. I left a message that I am proud of, in retrospect, because it was calm, and it did not contain any of the words that were actually occurring to me. I said my name. I said I had received her call. I said I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the situation. I gave my number. Then I stood at the kitchen counter and called my attorney. Tobias Gran had been my family law attorney since the divorce. He was a careful, thorough man in his mid-50s with an office in Clintonville and a reputation for being the person you wanted in your corner when things got procedurally complicated. I had retained him for the custody arrangement and hadn't needed him since, but I had kept his number in my phone with the same reasoning I kept a spare tire in my trunk. I told him what had happened in 2 sentences. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do not go to that school today." I said Zara was there and I needed to pick her up. He said, "Call the after-school coordinator. Tell them you're running late. Ask them to keep her until you have more information." He said, "If police have already been notified, which may or may not be true, you want to know what you're walking into before you walk into it." He said, "Do not speak to any law enforcement officer, any school official, or any CPS representative without me present." I called the after-school coordinator, a patient woman named Gloria, who said she'd keep Zara until 6 without a problem. Then I sat at my kitchen table with my phone face up and waited for someone to tell me what I was accused of. The call from Detective Ray Esposito of the Columbus Police Department came at 5:09 in the afternoon. He introduced himself in the practiced, neutral tone of someone who makes calls like this regularly, and he said he wanted to ask me some questions about my daughter Zara and my living situation. He said it in the same tone someone might use to ask about parking regulations. I told him, with a steadiness I did not entirely feel, that I had spoken to my attorney and that I would be happy to schedule a formal interview with Tobias present. There was a pause. He said that was fine. He said he'd be in touch. He did not tell me what the allegation was, and I did not ask, because Tobias had told me not to ask questions I wasn't ready to receive answers to over an unsecured phone call. When I hung up, my jaw was tight enough that I could feel it in my temples. I texted Tobias the detective's name. He texted back, "I know him. He's fair, but thorough. Don't underestimate thorough." I stared at that last sentence for a while. Then I got in my car and drove to Fairfield Elementary to pick up my daughter. The after-school room was in the gym annex, warm and loud with the end-of-day energy of 20 children who had been sitting still all day and were now vigorously not sitting still. Zara was in the corner with her best friend, a girl named Petra Huang, working on something with colored pencils, and she looked up when I came in and gave me the wave she always gave me, small and casual, the wave of someone who was genuinely happy to see me, but also ate and cool about it. I signed her out. I helped her zip her backpack. I asked about her day. She told me about a substitute teacher who'd mispronounced 3 students' names and about a disagreement she and Petra had had over which ocean was the most important, which Zara had resolved by explaining that all oceans were technically the same ocean. I drove home listening to her talk, watching her in the rearview mirror, and I did not let anything I was feeling reach my face. This is, I think, one of the things single parents get very good at, the complete decoupling of internal state from external presentation. I made her dinner. I helped with her homework. I read to her. I kissed her forehead at 8:30 and turned off the light. Then I went to my kitchen table and started writing down everything I could remember about every interaction I'd had with every adult at Fairfield Elementary in the past 12 months. Now, I wrote for 2 hours. I wrote 7 pages. Tobias called me the next morning at 7:15. He had spoken to Detective Esposito's supervisor and had a clearer picture of the allegation. A parent named Renee Colton had filed a formal report with both the school and the Columbus Police Department, claiming that she had witnessed me physically strike Zara in the Fairfield Elementary parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks prior. She stated that she had observed me grab Zara's arm with what she described as excessive and alarming force and strike her on the back of her legs. She stated that Zara had cried and that I had told her to stop crying in a threatening manner. She stated that she had photographed the incident on her phone. I listened to Tobias read this back to me. My coffee was going cold on the counter, and I left it there. Renee Colton. I knew exactly who she was. She lived 4 houses down from me on Glenbrook Avenue, in a house with a white fence and a motion sensor porch light that went off at all hours of the night. She had a son named Oscar in Zara's class. She had, over the preceding 8 months, found reasons to stop and talk to me in the school parking lot with increasing regularity. She had invited me to a neighborhood cookout in June. She had texted me twice asking if I wanted to grab coffee to discuss a school fundraiser. I had been friendly and noncommittal and had not taken her up on either invitation because I had no interest in her, and I had made what I thought was that clear through consistent, polite deflection. I told Tobias all of this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That context is important, and we will use it. But we need to address the immediate allegation first." He said, "Does she have a photograph?" That was the question. That was the thing that kept me awake that Friday night and most of Saturday. If Renee Colton had a photograph that appeared to show me striking my daughter, I was dealing with fabricated evidence, which was a different and considerably more serious problem than a false verbal accusation. I sat with this. I thought about the Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks prior, that she had specified. I went through my phone and found exactly 4 photographs I'd taken that day, all of them at Zara's soccer practice that evening. Zara mid-run with mud on her shin guards, Zara celebrating a goal with both arms up, Zara arguing with a referee in the earnest and completely ineffective way of 8-year-olds everywhere, Zara eating an orange slice on the sideline with her hair loose from its braid. I looked at those 4 photographs for a long time. Then I opened my calendar app and looked at what Wednesday 3 weeks prior had actually been. I had dropped Zara at school at 8:10 in the morning. I had been in a structural review meeting from 9 to noon. I had eaten lunch at my desk. I had picked Zara up from after school at 5:15. I had a receipt from the pharmacy 2 blocks from the school time stamped 5:31 because I'd stopped to pick up her allergy medication. I had all of this. None of it disproved what Renee claimed to have seen, but all of it was documentation, and documentation was the only currency that mattered right now. I sent everything to Tobias by 11 o'clock Saturday morning. Tobias had arranged for the formal interview with Detective Esposito for the following Monday at the Columbus PD's Non-Emergency Investigations Office, a beige building on Morse Road that looked like it had been designed by someone who had heard the concept of a building described but had never seen one. Tobias met me in the parking lot at 8:45. He was wearing a suit and carrying a folder that was thicker than I expected, and he briefed me for 20 minutes in the parking lot before we went in. He said, "Answer what you're asked. Don't elaborate. Don't try to win the room. Don't talk about Renee Colton unless Esposito brings her up. Let me handle the documentation questions." I nodded. My hands were in my pockets because if they were in my pockets, I didn't have to think about whether they were steady. And a Detective Esposito was a compact man in his late 40s with reading glasses and a desk covered in organized stacks of paper. He had 19 years on the Columbus PD's Crimes Against Persons unit, which Tobias had told me meant he was good at reading people, which was either useful or not, depending on what he read in me. He was professional and unhurried. He asked me to describe a typical afternoon school pickup. He asked about my relationship with Zara. He asked about her school experience, her friendships, her temperament. He asked whether she had ever had any injuries requiring medical attention. I answered everything directly and without elaboration, the way Tobias had told me to. Then Esposito placed a photograph on the desk between us. The photograph was taken from a distance, through what appeared to be a car window, and it showed a man and a young girl in what I recognized as the Fairfield Elementary parking lot. The girl appeared to be pulling away. The man's hand was on her arm. The angle was oblique, and the resolution was poor. And without context, you could read the image as either a parent redirecting an uncooperative child or something considerably worse. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I said, "That's me and Zara. And that's from 3 weeks ago on a Wednesday. And I can tell you exactly what was happening in that photograph." Esposito waited. I said, "Zara had run ahead of me toward the road and I grabbed her arm to stop her. A delivery truck had come through the drop-off lane faster than it should have. She was upset because I had startled her and she cried. I told her to calm down. I told her she had scared me. However, I told her we don't run in parking lots. I can show you the receipt from the pharmacy 2 blocks from here, time-stamped 11 minutes after that photograph was apparently taken, and I can show you that Zara had a wellness check with her pediatrician 6 days after this photograph was taken, at which no injuries or concerns were noted." Esposito looked at me for a moment. Then he wrote something down. Tobias placed 3 documents on the desk: the pharmacy receipt, the medical record from Dr. Yaw, and a printed photograph I had not known he was bringing, which was a color image of the same parking lot taken from a different angle, showing the delivery truck that had been in the drop-off lane that afternoon. One of my neighbors, a retired man named Gerald Osey, who walked his dog past the school every afternoon at school dismissal time, had captured it on his phone without realizing what he had. Tobias had found this by canvassing the block with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had been doing this for 23 years. Esposito looked at the 3 documents. He looked at the photograph. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not dramatically, not in a way that telegraphed anything conclusive, but the quality of his attention changed. He said he'd be in touch. The CPS investigation opened the same week because this is how these things work. A police report generates a mandatory report to Children's Services, and Children's Services opens a case, and the case generates a caseworker visit, and the caseworker visit generates documentation, and the documentation generates a process that moves with its own institutional momentum regardless of what the underlying facts turn out to be. The caseworker assigned to us was a woman named Deja Simmons, who had been with Franklin County Children's Services for 11 years and who arrived at my house on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock with a colleague and a clipboard, and the careful, neutral expression of someone who had learned to enter a home without forming premature conclusions. I had taken the morning off work. Tobias was present. Deja walked through every room in my house. She photographed Zara's bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, the backyard. She noted the books on Zara's shelf, the art projects on the refrigerator, the homework schedule on the whiteboard beside the kitchen door. She asked about the contents of the pantry and the refrigerator with the specificity of someone checking a list. Then she sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked me a structured series of questions about my daily routines with Zara, my disciplinary approach, my support network, my work schedule. I answered everything. I did not perform warmth. I just answered. When she was done, she said she would need to interview Zara separately, at the school, with a trained child forensic interviewer. I said I understood. My jaw was tight and my stomach was doing something I didn't want to name, because the idea of my daughter being interviewed about whether her father hurt her was one of the sentences I had been unable to fully process since this started. Zara was interviewed the following Thursday by a forensic interviewer named Doctor, on Priscilla Obeng, who specialized in child protective assessments and had been conducting these interviews for 14 years. I was not present for the interview. I sat in a waiting room at a children's advocacy center with beige walls and a bowl of wrapped candies on the reception desk, and I stared at a poster about water safety for 42 minutes. When Zara came out, she was holding a sticker sheet and looked mildly bored, which was so deeply characteristic of her that I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for days. She said the lady had asked her a lot of questions about our house and our routines. She said they had played a memory game. She said she was hungry. I took her to the diner across the street and she ordered pancakes at 11:30 in the morning with the confidence of someone who knows that pancakes are contextually appropriate at any hour, and I watched her eat and did not let anything reach my face. Dr. Obeng's report was filed with Deja Simmons and with Tobias simultaneously. He called me as I was pulling out of the diner parking lot. He said, "It's clean." She corroborated everything. The parking lot incident, the delivery truck, the fact that you stopped her, her reaction, your reaction. She described it the way you described it, without prompting, in her own words. I pulled over. I sat in the car for a moment with my hand on the steering wheel. In the back seat, Zara was looking at the sticker sheet and deciding which ones to put on her water bottle. Clean. One word. And it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in 10 days. The investigation was not over. These things don't end the moment the evidence goes the right way. They continue because they have to, because institutions are built for thoroughness, and thoroughness requires time. But the shape of what was happening had changed, and I could feel it in the way Deja Simmons's follow-up calls became shorter and more administrative, and in the way Detective Esposito's tone shifted during our second brief conversation from careful and neutral to something that was not quite sympathy, but was in the neighborhood of it. Tobias, meanwhile, had begun doing what I had not asked him to do, but which I understood was necessary. He had started looking at Renee Colton, not in any way that was retaliatory. Just thorough, because that was who he was. And what he found within about 10 days of sustained research was this. Renee Colton had, 3 years earlier, in a suburb of Cleveland, filed a similar complaint against a neighbor. The neighbor had been a divorced father of 2, a man named Arthur Lim, and the complaint had alleged that he had struck one of his children in the driveway of their shared apartment complex. The case had been investigated and closed without finding. Arthur Lim had moved his family out of the apartment within 4 months of the complaint, which Tobias noted was almost certainly what Renee had intended. He had a contact in the Cleveland area legal community who confirmed this, along with the documentation, which Tobias obtained and added to a folder he was now calling Exhibit C. So he emailed it to me on a Saturday morning with a subject line that said, "Read this." I read it. Then I forwarded it to my phone and read it again. The crisis point arrived on a Sunday evening 3 weeks after the initial call, and it arrived in a form I hadn't anticipated. A text message from the parent of one of Zara's classmates, a woman named Brenda Achabe, whose son Felix had been in Zara's class for 2 years, and whose messages to me had previously been limited to playdate logistics and a chain about class snacks. The text read, "I heard about the complaint. I want you to know I don't believe it. But I thought you should know people are talking. The school listserv." She included a screenshot. The screenshot showed a thread in the Fairfield Elementary parent discussion group that had been active that day, in which another parent, whose name I didn't recognize, had posted a note expressing concern about a child safety issue in the school community and asking other parents to be vigilant about their children's well-being. The post did not name me. It did not specify the allegation, but several people had responded, and the thread had the particular viral quality of a rumor that everyone understood the specifics of without anyone stating them, the way these things move through a community with the efficiency of something designed to spread. My throat closed. I sat with the phone in my hand and understood that the allegation had now escaped the official channels and was operating in the social layer, where no amount of documentation controlled it and no attorney could file a motion against it. I had 24 hours, maybe less. And before the thing I had been managing privately became the thing everyone in my daughter's school community was talking about openly. I called Tobias at 8:14 on a Sunday evening. He answered on the second ring. Tobias said, "This changes the timeline." He said we needed to move the following morning. He said he was going to contact Detective Esposito and Deja Simmons directly and request a formal status update on both investigations, which would force both institutions to produce their current findings on the record. He said he was also going to contact Renee Colton's attorney because Renee had retained one, which Tobias had already established. And he was going to make it explicitly clear that we possessed documentation of the Cleveland incident, that we had a pattern of behavior, and that we were prepared to move forward with a civil claim for defamation and malicious filing of a false report if the matter was not resolved correctly and quickly. He said, "The pressure on you right now is social. The pressure on her is legal. We make hers heavier than yours." I asked him what I should do in the meantime. He said, "Call every parent you trust and tell them the truth before someone else tells them a version of it." I hung up and spent the next hour doing exactly that. I called Brenda Achebe. I called Gerald Osei, the neighbor who'd photographed the delivery truck. I called Devin Tran, the father of Zara's soccer teammate who I'd been friendly with for 2 years. I called my sister in Atlanta. I told each of them the same thing. Here is what was alleged. Here is what actually happened. Here is the documentation. Here is where the investigation stands. I did not editorialize. I did not ask for anything except that they know the truth. My hands were completely steady by the end. Steadiness comes easier when you have nothing to hide. Tobias met with Detective Esposito on Monday morning. He called me from the parking lot afterward. Esposito's investigation had found no corroboration of the abuse allegation. The photograph was consistent with a parent restraining a child from a traffic hazard. Gerald Osei's image of the delivery truck had been admitted into the case file. Dr. Yaw's medical records showed no injuries. Dr. Obeng's forensic interview showed no indicators of abuse or fear of a parent. Esposito was closing the criminal investigation. No charges would be filed. Chief Tobias said it with the matter-of-fact delivery of a man who had expected this outcome and was confirming it, not celebrating it. Then he said, "Deja Simmons is closing the CPS case this week. Unsubstantiated finding." He said those 2 words the way a doctor says the scan is clear, accurately, professionally, and with an awareness of what they mean to the person on the other end of the phone. I sat in my car in the driveway of my own house, engine off, and let myself feel it. Unsubstantiated, the most important word in my life that week. Tobias filed the civil suit against Renee Colton on a Wednesday morning, 8 days after the investigations closed. The suit alleged defamation, malicious reporting of a false child abuse complaint, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Exhibit A was the original police report she had filed. Exhibit B was the forensic documentation proving the allegation was false. Exhibit C was the Cleveland incident, obtained from public court records and from Arthur Lim, who had agreed to provide a written declaration stating that Renee Colton had filed a similar false complaint against him following his rejection of her social overtures, that the complaint had been investigated and closed, and that the experience had caused him to relocate his family. Exhibit D was a series of text messages Renee had sent me over the preceding 8 months, which I had preserved in their original form on my phone, and which Tobias's tech associate had extracted and documented, showing the progressive escalation of her contact and the shift in tone following my consistent non-engagement. The messages were not threatening in isolation. Taken together, more in sequence, with the complaint filed 6 weeks after the last unanswered text, they told a story that required no interpretation. Tobias sent a copy of the filing to Renee's attorney at 9 o'clock in the morning and a copy to the Columbus Police Department at 9:05. He sent a separate copy to Detective Esposito directly, with a cover note laying out the pattern of behavior across 2 incidents and 2 cities, and requesting that Esposito consider whether a criminal referral was appropriate. He was thorough. That was who he was. The story reached the local news 12 days after the civil filing, which I had not orchestrated and had not expected, though I understood in retrospect that a documented pattern of false child abuse complaints against single fathers in 2 Ohio cities was exactly the kind of story that moves. At the reporter was a woman named Celine Park from the Columbus Dispatch who had covered child welfare issues for 8 years and who contacted Tobias first before she contacted me. Tobias and I discussed it for 20 minutes. I agreed to speak on the record for one reason. Arthur Lim had spoken on the record first, and what had happened to him was worse than what had happened to me because he had not had a Tobias Grant or a Gerald Osei or a pharmacy receipt, and he had moved his children out of their home because he had no defense and he didn't know how to build one. The article ran on a Thursday morning. It was careful and sourced, and it named Renee Colton, which newspapers are entitled to do when court filings are public record. It described both incidents. It quoted Dr. Obeng's finding, with her permission. It quoted Arthur Lim. It quoted Tobias, who was precise and devastating in 3 sentences. Renee's attorney declined to comment. The article was shared in the Fairfield Elementary Parent Listserv by 8 o'clock that morning by a parent I had never met, with a 2-word message. Read this. I found out what happened next through a sequence of sources. Tobias, who has a direct line to information I don't. Brenda Achebe, who told me what the parent community was saying. And Devin Tran, who had gone to school with one of Renee's colleagues and heard things from that direction. Within 48 hours of the article running, Renee Colton withdrew her son Oscar from Fairfield Elementary and enrolled him in a private school across town. Her husband, whose existence I had been dimly aware of, moved out of the house on Glenbrook Avenue, according to Gerald Osei, and who saw the truck on a Saturday morning and texted me a single line, "You might want to know." The civil suit was settled 6 weeks later for an amount I am not able to disclose, but which was sufficient to constitute a meaningful acknowledgement that what she had done caused real, documentable harm. Her attorney negotiated a no-fault clause that Tobias accepted because Tobias is strategic and I was already getting what mattered. The Columbus Police Department, based on Esposito's referral and Tobias's documentation, referred the matter to the Franklin County District Attorney's Office for review. The DA's office charged Renee Colton with filing a false police report and making a false child abuse report, both misdemeanors with real consequences. She pleaded no contest 8 months later and received 2 years of probation and a formal record. I know because Tobias called me the day it happened. He said, "It's done." The same 2 words. Zara never fully understood what had happened, which was the point. She knew there had been a situation with a complaint that wasn't true. She knew some adults had come to talk to her and to look at our house. She knew her dad had been busy and serious for a few weeks, and that things had been different. She asked me about it once, on a Saturday afternoon when we were driving to soccer, and I told her the truth in the way you tell the truth to an 8-year-old. Someone had said something that wasn't accurate about me, and some people who check on these things had looked into it carefully and found out the truth, and now everything was resolved. She thought about this for a moment. Then she asked if we could get smoothies after practice. I said yes. She went back to looking out the window. I kept driving. There is a version of this story that focuses on what I lost. The weeks of sleep. The work I barely got through. The specific horror of having my competence as a father formally questioned by institutions that had the power to separate me from my child. Those things are real, and I carry them. But there is another version of the story, the one I come back to most often, which is about what held. The pharmacy receipt. Gerald's photograph, Dr. Yaw's records, Dr. Obeng's interview, Arthur Lim's declaration, Tobias's folder, every piece of ordinary, unremarkable documentation that I had simply accumulated by living the life I was actually living, or which turned out to be the most powerful thing I possessed. Renee Colton had built a case out of a photograph and a lie. I had built a life out of showing up. She had thought I had nothing. She hadn't understood that showing up was everything.